Last time we talked about why Jesus died, how he died, why people rejected him as a Messiah. What I'd like to do now is talk about why people believed in him, and specifically, why did Christianity grow so fast? What's interesting is after Jesus dies, his movement doesn't die with him. There were other people that call themselves Messiah right around this same time period, but when they die, their movement dies with them. For some reason, Jesus' followers stay faithful to him and spread his message. Some of the reasons why people saw him as Messiah are listed here. Remember that most Jews at this time, if they were looking for Messiah, they were looking for someone to liberate them from the Romans, just like Moses had liberated Jews from the Egyptians. They expected him to build a heavenly kingdom here on earth and establish true paradise on earth. Well, Jesus didn't do those things, so here's the Christian response to that. It says, well, he didn't establish an earthly kingdom, but he established a kingdom in heaven. It said that he didn't liberate us from the Romans, but he liberated us from our sins. And also, yes, he died, but he allowed himself to die so that he could be resurrected 3 days later, or come back to life permanently 3 days later. When Jesus dies, one of his followers, somebody that knew him, takes over, and his name is Peter. Here we see a picture of Peter holding a key. If you ever go into a church and you see someone holding a key, especially a Roman Catholic church, that person is Peter. And he's holding a key because it's believed that Jesus gave him the key to the church, or the power to direct and to move the church. Similar to the fact that if I wanted to give you my car, I'd have to give you my key to move and direct my car. When Jesus was killed, they looked for some of the leaders of his movement as well to arrest and to kill as well. They did arrest Peter, and he was supposed to die and be killed for what he was doing. Right before he was scheduled to be executed, Peter escapes. Now, according to Peter, he says that an angel appeared to him, and the chains literally just fall off of him, and he was able to walk out of the prison. Many historians would say that didn't really happen, that he would actually bribe the guards to get out. We don't really know exactly how he got out. We do know that he did get out. But like anyone, you just cheated death, right? And so Peter is going to lay low for a minute, and it's going to be James that's going to be the public leader. Then there's this other guy named Paul. Paul was educated. His father was Roman. He was a Pharisee. So remember, Pharisees don't really like Christians. They see Christians as corrupt Jews, disobedient Jews. And Paul was one of those Pharisees that did not like Christians. Even in his own words, he said he persecuted the Christians, or basically bullied the Christians. And we don't know exactly what that meant, what he did specifically, but we do know that he was an enemy to Christianity for a long time. According to Paul, he says that he's riding his horse on his way to Damascus, and he falls off his horse. And when he falls off his horse, he sees Jesus and hears his voice. And Jesus basically tells him that he wants him to stop bullying the Christians, stop persecuting the Christians, and to become Christian himself and spread his message of Christianity to the Gentiles, or the non-Jews. Kind of an interesting thing about Paul is his original name was Saul, but after this vision that he said he had, he starts calling himself Paul instead of Saul. This is out of the New Testament. And the interesting thing about the New Testament is we have lots of Paul's writings. He was very educated and he wrote a lot. And he wrote letters to a lot of people. So for instance, this comes out of 1 Corinthians, which means it's a letter that he wrote to Corinth in Greece. But he said, "For I am the least of the apostles, unfit to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God." Remember, he didn't even know Jesus. He said he had a vision of Jesus, but he was a bully to the church for a long time. Well, Paul did exactly what he said Jesus told him to do. And he starts spreading the Christian message to the Gentiles or the non-Jews. Or in other words, to the Romans. Now this is getting the attention of the Roman leaders. Up until this point, the Romans saw the Christians as different Jews. But they saw them as Jews because all the converts to Christianity were Jewish. So they didn't really see the difference between Christianity and Judaism. Similar to the fact, if I talk to a Christian today and I say, "Hey, what's the difference between Sunni and Shia Islam?" they're probably not going to be able to tell me the reason why. They just, in their minds, it's all Islam, right? And so later on in this course, we'll talk about what the difference is. But if you would have asked a Roman, "Hey, what's the difference between Christians and Jews?" they wouldn't have been able to tell you. They probably wouldn't have even heard of Christians before. But once he starts preaching the message and starts converting Roman citizens to Christianity, now the Romans see a difference because the Christians are worse than the Jews because they're a bigger problem. The Jews keep to themselves. They don't try to convert people to Judaism. But now all of a sudden the Christians are trying to actively convert people to their religion. Paul goes to Peter and James, the leaders of Christianity, and says, "Hey, I'm really, really sorry for what I did. Please forgive me. I want to help you guys out." This is similar to a bully coming up to you and saying, "Hey, I'm really sorry for beating you guys up. I want to be your buddy. I want to be your friend. In fact, let's hang out after school." Well, you're probably going to say no, right? You think it was a trap. And that's exactly what Peter and James said to Paul. They said, "Look, how can we trust you? You're a bully." So they say no for a while. Well, Paul goes out and he converts people to Christianity. He also gets donations to the church. And so he takes these donations, goes back to Peter and Paul and says, "Look, take this money as a symbol of my sincerity, and I want to join your movement." And so Peter and James says, "Fine, you can join the movement." Peter and James are going to still try to preach to the Jews and try to convince the Jews to become Christians, and Paul is going to be preaching to the Gentiles or to the non-Jews. But here we see this picture of Peter and Paul holding the church together. They're both important leaders in this movement. So Paul has a lot of success, and he starts converting a lot of non-Jewish converts or Gentile converts. The question is going to be, what's Christian and what's Jewish? Because up until this point, every single Christian was Jewish as well, and so they still practiced Jewish tradition, such as eating kosher meals and circumcision. So Paul is saying, look, that is Jewish, that's not Christian. So my Gentile converts who aren't used to eating kosher meals or who are not circumcised don't need to do those things in order to become Christian. They would if they needed to be Jewish, but we're not asking them to be Jewish. We're asking them to be Christian. There's a difference. The church nearly splits over this issue of kosher meals and circumcision. And it is an important thing. I mean, this could really change the church, because you can imagine Paul talking to a guy that is interested in what he's saying, and he says, "Hey, how do I join your church, Paul? How do I become Christian?" And if Paul had to tell him, "Hey, give up your bacon in the morning, oh yeah, and we're going to have to give you a pretty painful surgery in a sensitive area, I can just imagine that guy saying, oh, well, I'm not really that interested in your movement. I like it, but I don't like it that much. So this really has potential to divide the church. Paul and Peter don't see eye to eye to begin with. And so very easily we could have had the church split to where there was Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians, and the church just could have formed two separate churches. If that would have happened, that very possibly could have killed Christianity. It's possible that Christianity wouldn't have gained the momentum that it needed. We're not going to really talk about what circumcision means in this class, but let's talk about kosher meals for a minute. I love this picture right here. Right around Christmas or Hanukkah in 2007, there was a grocery store in New York City, in Greenwich Village, that had this advertisement out. It says, delicious for Hanukkah, petite smoked ham. Well, that's not kosher. Jews, or I should say observant or practicing Jews, don't eat ham because that's seen as not being kosher. So let's talk about what kosher means. There's lots of rules. Certain animals aren't supposed to be eaten at all. The main one is pork. Also shellfish. You're not supposed to eat shellfish. And when they're killed or when the meat is prepared, it has to be prepared in a certain way. The blood has to be drained and broiled out of it before it's eaten. Also, meat and dairy aren't supposed to be mixed. So let's say you go into a kosher restaurant or you're having a kosher meal and you're eating dairy and meat. What you'd see is a plate with a red ring around it and a plate with a blue ring around it. The plate with the red ring around it would be for your meats, and the blue ringed plate would be for your dairy, because they're not supposed to mix. So there's no such thing as a kosher cheeseburger. This is the article about the Hanukkah ham. If you're interested in reading it, I thought it was kind of funny. But there's a quote in here. It says, the guy who took the person that took the picture was Jewish, a non-observant Jew here, and the quote that I really like is, I wasn't offended in any way. I just thought, here's somebody who knows nothing about what Jews eat. Okay, so in this class you have to know something about what Jews eat. So Christianity nearly splits over this movement, and this is really a big deal, because like I said earlier, if Christianity would have split early on, it's very likely that it wouldn't have become what it is today. So in this picture we see Peter and Paul giving each other a hug. A lot of times in early Christian art you'll see those two together, working together, because they did butt heads quite a bit. And they did argue quite a bit, because they're both very determined people. And when they believe something is right, they'll fight for it, both of them. And so in art today and in early Christianity, we see that they really try to show that they did get along, though. Here's a map. If you look at the map, at the very top says the missionary journeys of the Apostle Paul. I want to focus just on the first one here. So if you go down to the key, we see the first one is the red one. Notice that let me get my mouse out here. Notice that he starts here in Antioch and he goes around, has a short little journey, and then comes back. That's the first one. Now let's focus on the purple and the turquoise. These are his second and third journeys. Notice he goes pretty far on these ones. Remember what he's trying to do. He's trying to convert the Gentiles. That's his mission. So he has to leave Judea and go to where the Gentiles live. So they go into Greece, Macedonia, and then back to Jerusalem, and then back up to Antioch. So if we look at his journeys, notice the second and the third, they kind of mirror each other. And we see him going back to the same places. Well, one reason why he would have gone back to the same places is to make sure that they're still Christians. He also wrote lots of letters called epistles to these places to make sure that the Christians were doing what he asked them to do or wanted them to do. The last one is the journey to Rome. Now notice where it starts. It starts right here in Jerusalem, and it ends in Rome. Also notice that there is no arrow coming back. So let's talk about why he makes this journey. Just a hint is he doesn't want to make the journey. And there is no arrow coming back. So let's find out what happens in Rome. Your yellow here, if you're taking stoplight notes, should probably be the death of Peter and Paul. And I forgot to change that on this video. Paul wants to take his converts into the temple. The problem is only Jews are supposed to go into the temple. And so here's Paul. He's taking his uncircumcised, pork-eating, Roman citizen Christians into the temple, and this is going to cause a problem. The Jews literally throw them out, and if they would have had the chance, they would have killed Paul right there. But lucky enough for Paul, there was Roman guards there to stop the fight. But Paul does get arrested for basically starting a riot. The thing about Paul is, remember, he is a Roman citizen, so he doesn't have to go to the Sanhedrin or the Jewish court in Jerusalem. He asks to have a trial in Rome as a Roman citizen. So he goes to Rome. The thing is, it takes him years to get to Rome. It takes him a long time while he's in Rome before he actually gets a trial. And all along the way, he's preaching Christianity. The problem for Paul is he's in Rome in 64 AD. And that's when a fire breaks out. Emperor Nero is in charge during this time period, and he blames the Christians for the fire. And so Christians are rounded up and killed. We'll talk more about Nero in the next video. But Paul and Peter are executed. What's interesting is Peter is crucified, but Peter doesn't want to be crucified like Jesus, so he asks to be crucified upside down, according to a Christian story. Paul is actually beheaded. So the question is, how come Paul gets a better death than Peter? Well, you have to remember, Paul is a Roman citizen, and so he dies by the sword. Remember, I said earlier that if you go into a Roman Catholic church or a Christian church and you see someone holding a key, that's Peter. If you see someone holding a sword, that's Paul. And that's just showing that about Nero and this fire and Nero's persecution of the Christians.